So let's take the next step and start working with the summary that we've produced and developing the beginnings of our reading response. Now, the next step here is to reflect on the text, reflect on its main argument, and decide whether we agree, disagree, or conditionally agree with it. Once we've done that, we can then look at the list of templates that I've provided for you in order to help craft our argument, which will form the centerpiece of our reading response. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have three different possibilities here. I'm going to use one template, assuming that I agree with the text, one assuming that I disagree, and one assuming that I conditionally agree. And you can see how the template helps us to sort of force our thoughts in a useful, precise direction. So what I would probably do if I was using this as my reading response is I would probably begin my paper with this summary. This is a good way to start because it shows that we actually understand the text that we're dealing with. We don't want to spend too much time summarizing the text because we need to get to our own argument, but beginning with that summary is a good way to lay the groundwork for our reader. So that way they know what it is that we actually think that we're responding to. So let's first begin with the assumption that we agree with Taleb's claim, and we want to build off of what he's saying on some way. So let's start filling in the blanks here. So Taleb's theory of, and then we probably want to replace this with something like skin in the game, is extremely useful because it sheds light on the difficult problem of expertise. Taleb helps us to understand the difference, helps us to understand and distinguish between those who have true mastery of a subject and those who merely have the appearance of mastery. The notion of skin in the game allows us to recognize that in some fields of human endeavor, one can easily make an objective distinction between those who have actual comprehension of a field and those who simply have the appearance of comprehension insofar as it allows us to show that expertise ultimately depends on results. If a person is sufficiently skilled in a field, it should not matter what they look like or how they present themselves, as long as they accomplish their goals and deliver results for interested stakeholders. Okay, this is maybe a little bit wordy, so maybe we can trim this down a bit. So maybe here we can just replace this with the notion of skin in the game. And then this is sort of repeating myself here, so I can just cut this out. So I merely have the appearance of mastery insofar. So we can cut this away. it allows us to discover that expertise ultimately depends on results. If a person is sufficiently skilled in a field, it should not matter what they look like or how they present themselves, as long as they accomplish their goals and deliver results for interested stakeholders. That seems pretty good. Now, it's still a little bit abstract. So what I would probably want to do next is to think of some particular field of expertise. So maybe medicine, maybe epidemiology, for instance, and look at how this helps us to understand what's going on here. So for instance, we could look at the COVID-19 situation, and we could say to ourselves, how does Taleb's theory help us to understand the difference between those epidemiologists who made models that sounded good, that seemed to promote a certain kind of policy that those in power wanted to hear, versus those who actually accurately modeled what ended up happening on the ground? We saw a lot of this, right? At the beginning of the pandemic, there were a lot of different projections that were made, which didn't really have a lot of resemblance to reality. What skin in the game helps us to understand is that there may well be a class of person who looks like an expert, who talks as if they are an expert, but who doesn't actually achieve the results that expertise should provide. So this is a really useful theory for distinguishing effectively between the charlatans, who are just putting on a really good show, and the people who might not speak as eloquently, might not present themselves in the most eloquent way, but nevertheless get the job done. So I think that's something that's quite interesting. That's how I would carry on here. I'd want to make it a little bit more focused, and I'm kind of thinking aloud on the page. Here's what I do if I was effectively disagreeing with Taleb's position. So let's fill in the blanks here. So Taleb's claim that one should dismiss an individual's appearance and instead value those who have skin in the game rests upon the questionable assumption that there is a connection between how people present themselves and what they are able to do. It is perfectly possible for a charlatan who has no expertise to present themselves as an authority, but it is also perfectly reasonable to imagine that someone who has actual talent and knowledge can present themselves in a way that corresponds to our models of expertise. In other words, there is no reason to think that a great surgeon may not present themselves as a great surgeon. Appearance and expertise are not coupled in any way. And once again, this is quite abstract, so what I'd want to do in the next few sentences is really focus down on some concrete situation that this helps us to understand. So I would probably want to look for one example of a person who's a true expert, but they also present themselves in exactly the way that Taleb is suspicious of. And my argument in the response would be something along the lines of just appearance and reality, appearance and talent are completely independent variables. There's no connection, so Taleb isn't really making much of a point. That's what I'd be arguing there. Okay, let's say I'm conditionally agreeing. So here's where I like some things here, but not everything. So I might say something along the lines of, Taleb is right that reality filters out incompetence, and that those with true talent will achieve measurable results. But he seems on more dubious ground when he claims that this entails that one should overlook appearances when making decisions about making important decisions, such as, for example, which surgeon one wants to perform one's surgery. This an individual who understands how the public views those in particular roles is also likely to be an individual who is thoughtful about their realm of expertise. A surgeon who looks the part and makes their patients and prospective patients feel comfortable is also likely to be a surgeon who performs well under pressure. Okay. So again, it's still a bit abstract. I don't want to really get that concrete, but this shows a good example of an argument where I agree with a lot of what Taleb is saying, but I want to complicate it a little bit. I want to muddy the waters for him and not just go along entirely with what he's saying. So this is how you should really get started when you're working on your reading response. Read the text carefully, make sure you understand what's going on, then write a summary. Make sure that you can really clarify and state in a concise way what's the main idea. Then ask yourself, do I agree, disagree, or conditionally agree? Once you have one of those positions, work with one of the templates that I've provided and start to develop your own argument. I'm someone who really likes to think aloud through my writing. I don't usually make as many big picture plans before I start going. Through the process of writing, I tend to reach some understanding of what my position is and what gaps there are still to fill. So it's quite likely that you'll be like me here and start with a fairly abstract argument, and in the process of revising, rewriting, drafting, you'll make your ideas more concrete and hopefully focus them down on something tangible that your reader can understand. I hope that helps you out, and best of luck with your paper going forward.